Welcome to Money Matters TV. My name is Paul Mitchell. I'm a Chief Credit Officer with Upland Business Capital. I'm the host for this show, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mike Dever of Brandywine Asset Management. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Mike, as you can see, manages assets and other such as investments. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of businesses that have had their ups and downs in the past year or so, impacted by, among other things, was the pandemic. So, Mike, somehow the stock market has done pretty well. Somehow a lot of big companies have done extremely well. You read about, of course, all these small businesses that are just dying by the wayside, whether it's restaurants or other small community businesses. So what's going on? Give us some perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's been one of the most unusual periods I've seen in my 40 years in business now. And we have this really bifurcated economy where you have people who are actually just suffering on the lower end. And primarily I say lower end, and certainly all the service workers from state governments putting companies out of business, essentially mandating closure. To me, it seems like a little wrong. I mean, if you're going to take something from someone, eminent domain, for example, there's usually compensation provided. In this case, there's restaurants and bars and other fitness centers that are being told they have to shut down, but they're not being provided in a lot of cases compensation for that, and all those workers then are just stuck to the wayside.
So we have these service providers, these lower paid employees, these smaller businesses. They're really hurting. But how about the service providers and lower paid people that work for these larger companies? They're just going along just fine and dandy?
Yeah, for the most part, then a lot of the larger companies are doing extremely well. And you couple that with the stimulus that we've received. Now we're in our second round of that. And you've seen something that's pretty much unprecedented in a recession, with the savings rate just exploding. The savings rate was maybe 7%, 8%. It jumped over 30%.
This is a macro. I'll call it a macro figure. That is, if $1 billion have been saved, let's say a year or 2 years ago, now it's $2 billion, but nobody's saying who's saving the money. I guess the rich people are saving more money because the poor people, they don't have any money to save.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean,
so the rate sounds great, but isn't necessarily great for,
again, very, very
population.
bifurcated. Yeah, where you've got in the aggregate, the economy is actually doing okay, right now because of stimulus primarily. But individually, you've just got some of the biggest disparities between success and struggles that we've ever had in the history of this country.
Could you name some industries that have done really well, other than maybe Amazon and Walmart?
Yeah, right. Or for example, us talking right now using video conferencing instead of having an in-studio experience. So obviously those companies have done phenomenally well. They're all exploding like crazy. I'm really interested in talking to our guest today, who's in the home improvement kind of kitchen business, because my feeling is that
agriculture, I think.
Is that right?
Farming. Oh, let's get basic stuff, I believe. We'll find out.
Yeah, let's see. So there seems like there's a lot of businesses that are doing well because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And obviously the ones we mentioned early on that are not doing well, and people just not going out and spending on those entertainment and hospitality businesses. All that money's being saved, and we're seeing a lot of what you mentioned earlier. Stock market's doing great. A lot of flows going into equities now. So you're having some really record, in some cases, outrageous performances of stocks like Tesla. Very reminiscent of 1999.
Well, my background is financing small and medium-sized businesses, and basically as a consultant last few years, and basically my business has been dead.
Is that right?
For the past year, because what bank? I introduce companies that are looking for financing. A bank that likes to do hotels or something that's not quite the main thing in favor or something like that.
Yeah.
And the bank just goes, "Why do we know what's going on?"
Right.
Did well last year. And the shoe hasn't fallen. The second shoe hasn't fallen yet at all. So it's been very difficult. Like I said, I don't finance, get involved in multi-billion-dollar companies.
Okay.
Or like a few million to maybe 25, 50, $100 million company would be a huge company for me to get involved.
Okay. And were you doing a lot with hospitality, like hotels you mentioned?
Not a lot, but some.
Yeah.
Because a lot of banks don't like to do that type of stuff.
Right.
Some are more attuned to it. You see, in the Philadelphia area, it's kind of interesting. You see these smaller banks from outside the immediate Philadelphia area are opening centers in the Philadelphia city and suburbs. The big banks are pulling back and closing branches.
What's the difference? Why are they seeing it so different? Yeah.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
All relative, I guess.
Not a big enough opportunity for the big banks, but the small ones.
Well, they've been around for decades and stuff, and they've. What can I say?
Right.
Excuse me. One of the things you're probably going to see is after this thing is over a bit, you'll see some more consolidation, where the larger small banks, I'll say, are going to try to gobble up some of the other smaller banks.
So, are you
larger banks?
When you say the business is slowed down, is that from the bank not lending or the demand not being there from the business?
Bank's not lending.
Yeah. So the businesses still need capital. They're still looking.
How do I do my write-up, to my senior approver of the bank for the loan, that the company that's done relatively well for the last year, maybe even the last 9 months, is going to continue to do so. We have some of these unknowns still.
Right.
So, the pandemic and whatever.
And is that being? I was just wondering, is that being picked up at all? That lending demand, that opportunity? Are there any kind of private lenders or online lending that's starting to take over for whether banks aren't stepping up?
Well, that's been going on for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
It ain't as cheap as the bank, I'll tell you that.
Okay.
To put it mildly, it's easier, and again, it's generally on the smaller end too.
Right. So if you can get the bank funding, you got the lower cost.
Yeah, it's more work
and stuff.
And you got to jump through more hoops.
Sure.
You got to have better, performance and background, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way to go. I mean, look at residential mortgage rates. What, 2%, 2 point something percent?
I know.
Are you kidding me?
My sons are buying a house now. They're going in on it together, and 2 3/8, 2.5. I mean, it's popped up a little bit in the last couple of days with the rates going up a little bit. Yeah, that's just phenomenal. Unbelievable rates.
Well, we have some interest from one of our viewers about managing assets and that type of thing, Mike, and I thought you might be the appropriate person to ask this question. We have Lewis Keller of Philadelphia, who asks, what are the advantages of an index fund?
So there's two primary advantages to an index fund. The first is in one investment, you get a diversified, and I'll put that in quotes, but portfolio of stocks that you're holding. And I put that in quotes because even though those stocks are diversified and they might go up and down somewhat differently, the reality is when you have a market shock and stocks fall, they all tend to fall together. So you don't get that protection on the downside. But the second advantage is the cost. You can go into an index fund for basis points, 0.05% annual cost on that. So you can, rather than buying a lot of individual stocks, you can get in there and have that exposure at a low cost. There is a disadvantage in my mind, and that is that you're exposed to the naked risk of holding that portfolio of stocks. There's no protection. And that's something that's starting to change now. I mean, my company's kind of leading the way in some of that stuff where we're providing protected funds that give you the same exposure to the S&P, for example, but you have protection on the downside against the big bear market losses.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. There are lots of different ways of investing out there.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, now we move on to the next part of our show. We have a very interesting guest this time, Ted Lebeau, who's co-founder of Kitchen Table. Now that sounds about as basic in small businesses as you can get, but I think we're going to find out a little bit more about it. It's a little more complex. So let's welcome Ted Lebeau to the show. Ted, welcome. Not sure I can hear you, Ted.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. There we go. So Ted, Kitchen Table Consultants, in the picture I'm looking at you, I see a table behind you. Not sure if that's your kitchen, but perhaps you can tell you, what is Ted Lebeau Kitchen Consultants?
So, Kitchen Table Consultants is a consulting firm that provides business management consulting to food and farm businesses. We've been around since 2009, and the name the table came up from the fact that we typically sit down with our clients at their kitchen table. Farmers
Right.
are not big on offices. They might be out in the tractor or in the field or in their barn, and we felt that really rang true, and it does. So that name comes from that. We are a team of 15 people across the country,
Wow.
providing business management consulting to food and farm businesses.
That's amazing. So, Mike, you had a question, I think.
Yeah, I guess you explain a little bit what you do there. What makes you different, or what kind of competition do you have out there in what you're doing, and how do you differentiate yourself?
The first thing that differentiates us is that everybody who is a lead consultant on our projects has one of two characteristics. They have either run their own business or they have run somebody else's business and been fired. So when we're consulting with our clients, we come at it from a standpoint of actual experience, hands-on experience. We have a number of MBAs, we have ex-farmers, business people, but everybody comes at it experientially from what we do. And I think that's what makes us, I know that's what makes us unique. That's what our client tells us, because we can combine both the connectivity on an emotional level, what it feels like to run a small business and be at the top and be lonely, as well as provide advice that's really sound from a business management and financial standpoint.
And what size farms would you be dealing with? For example, we once stayed at a B&B in Vermont. It's like a third generation farm, a dairy farm. The guy was just struggling like heck. His wife came up with the idea of why not rent out a few rooms and serve some nice breakfasts and dinners to some of the city folk. And it was a marvelous experience.
Sure.
But it was, I don't know, you have 5 employees or something like that. The family. Is that something the size you'd get involved in?
That and larger. So I'll give you some statistics. Our statistics are being compiled for 2020. We've worked with nearly 500 businesses since our inception. In 2019, we worked with 144 clients. 50% of those clients were farms. 35% of those clients were in the supply chain. That's anybody from distribution to food hubs to fertilizer manufacturers. And the last 15% was a combination of nonprofits serving the regional food system and local food retailers. Those 144 clients sold $100 million of local food, employed 1,000 people, and farmed 10,000 acres.
Wow. So they can afford to pay a consultant some money.
That's always a good thing.
Well, and that's actually, it's a little bit of an aside, but one of our tenets is that we have to provide more value than we cost. Yep. And so one of my favorite questions is when somebody asks me, anybody who's farming says, how do they afford you? And the answer is we have to provide more value than we cost. And for the most part, we do that.
So the big farm to table movement that's been going on, is that something you're consulting in or involved in? And I bring that up also because one of our local restaurants that was their rise to fame, they had to close down during COVID. Yeah. They're out of business now. And so how are you seeing this affecting those businesses if you are involved with them?
So those are every one of our businesses that we're working with has a designation that niches it, whether that's organic, sustainable, antibiotic-free, regenerative, local, but the vast majority have the local designation, and that's really what farm to table is about, right? You want to know the person you're getting your food from, and they're in your local community. So all of our clients are doing business, the vast majority of their business on a local level. We Our business, if you listen to the demographics, no restaurants at all. Not a single restaurant is in our business. Some of our farms sold to restaurants. Most of them pivoted very quickly because of the demand for local consumption into selling directly to the consumers or finding an organization that was selling direct to the consumer. So from our standpoint in our business and the clients that we work with, they did not see the impact that a restaurant would have seen.
Okay.
In fact, they saw the opposite. Most of our clients are up anywhere from 30 to 400% in sales year on year.
Awesome.
Yeah, this is similar to what we talked about earlier on. I'm sorry, Paul, but what we talked about early on is this bifurcation in the economy where you have the farm to table restaurant that's up the road from us closing down for good, but at the benefit, this whole COVID disruption, at the benefit of other people who are in a position to be able to pivot like that.
Yeah.
Ted, how do you market your services?
Our services are marketed predominantly through word of mouth. Our satisfied clients tell other satisfied clients. I would say that's our number one marketing. The second is our involvement in the community. So we sit on multiple nonprofit boards and developing, from my personal standpoint, I think I've developed more business and more really good friends from the nonprofit boards that I've sit on in the industry, the local food industry. And the last place, well, I wouldn't say the last place, but we do a lot of seminars, either virtual ones like this or at conferences. And we actually find that those seminars, it's really interesting. We get calls from seminars. We got one last week that we had done in New York State 4 years ago. I saw you give this and I kept your card, and I was like, wow. So that's really where our business comes from.
So Ted, how'd you decide to get into this business? You don't look like a farmer. I don't see any overalls on you,
Oh, I actually have a pair. I can go get them and put them on. Actually, I have 3 pairs. One pair is being saved for my youngest daughter's wedding. It's being kept in very good condition.
Oh, she's going to appreciate that. I'm sure you showing up in your overalls.
Actually, the youngest has said I can. How did I get into this? I grew up on a farm in Idaho. Wanted to be a large animal veterinarian. The D- in intro animal physiology at Cornell convinced me not to be a large animal veterinarian. And I spent the next through 2009 owning and or running about 12 businesses, all of which were hands and feet businesses, manufacturing and distribution. In 2009, as we all know, the previous great economic disaster happened, and I happened to have finished doing a turnaround on a printing facility and had the opportunity to spend a year figuring out what I wanted to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
And stumbled on to getting back into food and agriculture sort of by accident. And in this particular niche, the local food system is a group of very, very passionate people that are trying to make a difference in the community and the environment. And one of the missing pieces of that is the economic component of it. And so what we find regularly is that they're just not paying attention to the finances. And so many times it's very easy for us to make a difference quickly because A, they're ready because the pain of the finances are there, and B, there's a lot of literally low-hanging fruit to be able to help them with and to get them. And once you get a small win, they get excited about it and they do more. So that's how I got into it.
So you're very entrepreneurial. That's just, it sounds like from the start, you were involved in a lot of different businesses, and entrepreneurism comes naturally to you, I guess.
Much to my wife's chagrin, yes.
Yeah, have you gotten that get a real job type of comment?
In 2009, the comment was, you're going to go get a real job. And I'm like, no, I want to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. That was the last time I got that comment. So apparently I've either scared her away or done a reasonable job of providing.
You've been successful at what you're doing. That explains it.
Yeah, probably.
If you had thought about having done one thing differently, what would that have been?
Would I have done one thing differently? Not a damn thing. I love what I do. And every piece of the puzzle that has gotten me here, every mistake and problem or issue that I did got me to where I am. And I wake up every morning and am excited to get out of bed. So I've asked in the past, I've been asked that question and I came up with an answer, but I'm 53 years old. We've got 15 people in the firm. I'm bringing on 2 new partners. We're doing a joint venture to create a marketing firm. We just raised our first $150,000 for a fund. We're doing some great work. We've got a process where we'll trade our time for some equity, but we'll also just give our time for free to certain people or sliding scale. I mean, all the things that make a business incredibly fun to work are part. I got a great team. They're good people. They care about me. I care about them. I'm sorry, I can't think of something that I would differently.
Well, so the D minus turned out to be your best grade you probably got in college.
Actually, because it is a point of contention with me that I am minorly competitive. Every semester, my grade point average increed.
Very good. Well, I mean, but look, you're starting at a D minus.
Yeah, right.
So what is the fund? You said you raised $150,000 for a fund. What is the purpose of that?
So the fund was a fund to help fund working capital for Pennsylvania farmers. Oh. So our clients who need some working capital have access to a fund. It's based out of it's not ours. I helped raise it. It's in the CDFI that does work specifically with farmers. And they wanted to help Pennsylvania farmers with working capital, which is the hardest money to find is working capital, especially for farmers because working capital for farmers is hard because there's no assets to back them, right? I mean,
no collateral.
Land is,
hey, how can you leave me alone?
Yeah, right.
All knows this, right? Yeah.
So that fund is making $10,000 loans to farms for pure.
Ted, if you could impart one thing to an entrepreneur, what would that be?
There's 2 things you need to know to be an entrepreneur, and one thing that's really important that they need to keep in mind. So, and I say this all the time. So the 2 things they need to know. The first one is, in order to be an entrepreneur, you need to know how to use Excel, and you need to know how to plunge a toilet. They are euphemism for something else. Excel is how do you go about solving a problem in a very structured manner, right? How do you lay things out in a manner that gives you, it's one way of solving, part of solving the problem, but you want to be structured about it, right? That's Excel. The plunge the toilet is, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you better be ready to do whatever it takes to make it work. Mm-hmm. And the last thing that I share, which is akin to plunging a toilet, is the most successful entrepreneurs I know have an incredible level of perseverance.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I would add flexibility. It is in my banking and private equity background, financed some entrepreneurs, and they said, no, this is what we're going to do, and we're never going to do anything different. 3 years later, we're pivoting, to the left or the right or something like that, and we will never have sales. We're a retailer. We don't waste our money on that kind of stuff. They had sales. They did this. We'll never, the markets they defined. This is our market. Their market, expanded or diversified as it went along. That made all the difference in the world.
Right.
From my perspective.
Yeah.
Well, things change or just aren't working or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. I mean, where would Netflix be if they were still shipping out CDs or DVDs in the mail, right? I mean, you have to pivot. No business today is the same as it was successful business 20 years ago. They've all changed.
Yeah. That video, the box video business, what was that company? The huge one that was on every corner that one left, I think.
Oh yeah. Blockbuster.
Yeah, it's like a B&B now or something.
Yeah,
Spend the
right.
night in the store.
Yeah.
Boxes on the shelf.
They own the world, and they saw it coming, but they didn't act on it. And that's the other thing with entrepreneurs, I think, is they not only act, they act quickly. They don't sit there with analysis paralysis trying to figure out, does this make sense? They get an idea, they start running with it. That can be a fault too.
Well,
They
the
always-
with an entrepreneur is that if something doesn't work out, they're going to lose something pretty serious,
right.
right? So the sense of urgency is is there to make something happen.
It's their skin in the game. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Exactly right, Mike.
So Ted, what was the most important thing you learned in 2020?
That as a member of the above 50, we have the responsibility and the vision to remember that hope is a renewable resource, and that each morning when we get up, we need to renew that resource for ourselves and for the people around us. I think that at our ages, we have a perspective and an ability to work with change. Mike talked about the haves and the have-nots and what's happening. We have a huge responsibility at our age and our experience to remember that hope is a renewable resource and pass it on. And somebody told me that, and man, it struck a chord for me.
I love it. Attitude. Attitude is a lot of it. Sure, sure. Well, Ted, so if people want to find out, our viewers want to find out more about Kitchen Table Consultants, they can just go on the internet and type that in and find out all about you and what you do. And
Yeah, www.kitchentableconsultants.com. There's a website out there. We love to talk to people.
well, that's terrific. That's terrific. So any closing words for our viewers in terms of your business or entrepreneurialism or farm to table or food or distribution or whatever?
I've been fired twice in my career, one of whom left me with a very good statement that I always like to share with entrepreneurs. Volume is vanity, profit is sanity.
Yeah, you got to have it. You got to have it. Amen. Well, that's terrific. I really appreciate having you on the show. A little different angles, not the classic corporate type. I can see that and appreciate that. It really sounds like you're helping the community and being part of it. So that's terrific. So thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
We're going to have our next guest coming up, which will be Ken Shear, president of Shear Consulting. That's SHER Consulting. So another consultant and another whole sort of universe. So thanks for watching the show. And remember, on this show, your money matters.
Thank you.